welcome back, everyone, to Funderbeam podcast. It's Monday, 6th of March already. That's nuts. I hope everyone's doing good. Last couple of podcasts, we've had some very impressive female founders and those involved in venture and angel investing and so on and so forth. And last week I met another impressive female voice in the industry at an event. Actually, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen at the event, but I'm glad. Anyway, just before I carry on, I'm going to say hi to Samantha Wood, or Sam. Sam, hi, how's it going?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Oli. Yeah, it was a great event, wasn't it? I'm not sure I knew what to expect either. But...
No, and that just for our listeners outside of the UK, this was an event in Bristol, which is in southwest the UK, and was put on by a group of people called Inclusive Angels that are involved in numerous initiatives. But clearly, I don't know if you agree, Sam, I think clearly the drive of that event was to try and encourage more women into the space in general, not really in any particular area.
Yeah, I think so. And actually the panel discussions indicated that, in terms of the mixture of founders, investors, but also the type of conversation that came out around, well, I use the line, "Hi, I'm Sam and I'm a financial feminist," which I think is part of the reason why we're having the conversation today. And that really means that it's about being passionate about equality around finances. So I'm sure we'll delve more into that, but I think that felt like it was very much a thread that ran through that event. And as we said before we came on air, something that runs through our firms. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important to say that event, and particularly some of the topics you covered, weren't specifically narrowed down to the act of investing in early stage companies, but just being involved in general. And we'll definitely touch on that. But what was quite clear as I was driving back that night, which was quite nice actually to drive back from an event, was that there's an awful lot more we can be doing in all sorts of areas. And it's not just about raising capital, and it's not just about being a founder. Actually, there's a whole gamut of things we can do. But before we get into all of the fun stuff, let's just intro Sam. Why don't you just give us the elevator pitch into what you do and how you got here and all that stuff?
Brilliant. Well, I'm a chartered wealth manager and financial planner by trade, but I would say my journey to get here has been quite different. So I grew up in Portsmouth. I would describe my background as pretty difficult, working class, certainly not surrounded by money, finance, wealth, and that side of things, and didn't have any education around it either, which is something I'm really passionate about in terms of financial education, and we'll come on to that. I would say the saving grace for me in terms of how did I get here was my real ambition and determination to become a soldier. I was always incredibly sporty. I did a lot of running at a high level. And at 16, I sort of fulfilled my ambition and joined the army, much to the dismay of my mum. She was a single mum, so I do remember her face as I got on the train with my one suitcase, heading off to join the army. But I had a great career, and it was definitely, and I think we'll touch on it at some point through the conversation, I learned a lot of lessons that are directly sort of attributable to what I do now whilst in the army. But I served for about a decade. I went to Sandhurst after 6 years and commissioned as an officer, so I left as a captain about 27 years old. And I went straight into actually more of an entrepreneurial type role, running my own business, before joining the industry of finance, which I've been in for over a decade now. And as I say, initially investment management for global and UK firms. And now I run my own practice as out of St James's Place Wealth Management, Wood Mitchell Financial Planning. So yeah, that's me.
Very impressive. And for those listening outside of the UK who might not be familiar, Sandhurst is our Royal Military Academy, where we train officers, the higher ranks of the army organisation. And having had Definitely 3 or 4 fun nights in the officers' mess at Sandhurst. It's a very impressive place, but what I would say is that if you've never been there before, the first time you arrive, you're definitely surrounded by this kind of, I can only call it like an atmosphere or smell of achievement. And it's one of those sort of places that has an aura, but I can see how people that have gone there, what it produces, and that, you know, there's obviously merits to and debates as to the methods and all of that. What do you think? Let's just specifically actually talk about Sandhurst just briefly then. How did that affect your, because actually just the other thing, just to dial back a second, most, you know, people go to Sandhurst straight from school or university to be officers and non-commissioned officer. So you actually served and then excelled enough to get the place at Sandhurst to become an officer. That's not an easy path. What do you think it was at Sandhurst or what did it instill in you, or what lessons did you take from there that you've kind of used in your day to day?
Yeah, no, you're right. It wasn't. I remember having quite a bit of almost like, how am I here when I arrived with my, they call it ironing board Sunday. You know, you're in your coveralls and your ironing board on your first day. If anybody Google Sandhurst, you'll definitely find out what that is. But I definitely learned a lot at Sandhurst, and we'll definitely come back to that. But I think it was my whole military career altogether. And actually growing, I was thinking about this but ahead of the podcast and thinking, I actually grew up in the army. You think about, I joined the day after my 16th birthday. I did my driving lessons in the army. I learned to drive in the army, but you don't just learn to drive, you learn to drive trucks, you do night driving, you do skid car, you know, obviously you need to be able to do all different types of driving. So everything that I did, that we all tend to go through as a rite of passage, was, I guess, on the extreme, because I was in this environment where I was a serving soldier. I mean, even I remember the millennium, don't know if you remember, everyone was worried what was going to happen at midnight. I was stood on guard on the gate at Bulford Camp, actually. It's one of my, so I'm stood there, all these drunk soldiers coming back in, and I'm there with my rifle guarding the camp as people, you know, have their fun night out. But I was fine with that. I was only just 18. So but yeah, so I grew up in the army, and so with that meant I had to mature quite quickly, had to take a lot of responsibility, a lot of accountability. By the time that I commissioned, I'd already been promoted 3 ranks, so I was already demonstrating those sorts of leadership skills and discipline. I think that's what Sandhurst really then, I guess, refines, aside from, you know, helping me to learn to eat with lots of knife and forks and all the really nice stuff, because clearly I didn't come from that type of background, which comes in quite handy now. But it was very much around how you can enable followership. Serve to lead is the motto at Sandhurst, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. I'm not saying I've always got it right, I'm not saying I always get it right, but I really do endeavour to see leadership as something that is quite selfless. And also, I guess the final thing to say is that it really is about, you go down to your barest moments, you know, the toughest moments I ever had, maybe not ever had, but certainly some of my toughest moments in the military were in some of those really difficult training exercises, whether that was in Cyprus or in the UK. And yeah, you have to dig deep. You have to dig deep when it hurts. You have to rally around you. And, you know, there's times in my personal life and professional life since the army where I've had to dig deep. And I think I refer back, you know, whether consciously or subconsciously, to those moments of digging deep, making sound decisions. And I guess I would just summarize that by several of my sort of bosses, if you like, when I was in the corporate environment, used to say about me that I would bring calm to chaos. And I think that is, guess, one of the key things is that I'm able to take a step back, no matter how chaotic a situation is, and hopefully come up with what is a calm plan to move forward.
It's the diplomatic attitude that one gets also from being in the environment, also with people from all over the world, because Sandhurst recruits come from all corners of the globe, funnily enough, and a big mix of all sorts of different people, actually, but thrown in then to rely on each other in a way that perhaps, you know, university doesn't really give you. I mean, since we're on equality and feminism and so on, what lessons did you pick up on equality there, in what traditionally, of course, is the most male-dominated environment with some pretty bold characters, having been told off by a few staff sergeants there just for stepping in the wrong place. How did you feel from that point of view when you got there? Did you feel like you were not the same as everyone else on the gender front? I mean, or how was it back then? This is going back 15, 20 years almost, so it's
I mean, on that point, things have, I would say, changed, but equally I have a lot of friends still serving, and I know they haven't changed that much. So, you know, there's an element of, yes, change is happening, but as we all know, change takes a long period of time. I mean, to put it in context, when I first joined, it was illegal to be gay in the army. And when I say illegal, if you were found out, you were kicked out of the army. You couldn't be openly. Obviously, there are a lot of what I would call sort of, you know, inwardly gay, as in they and we sort of knew about it, but you couldn't be outwardly gay in the army. And also there are a number of different roles that women could not do. So you couldn't apply to join certain arms or services or carry out certain roles. So whilst you were, you know, at Sandhurst, for example, we all did the same training, exactly the same training. We all had the same weapons. We did the same exercises. You knew that your options when it came to then commissioning were different to the options of the men. But what I would say, I really don't remember ever feeling like I was treated any different because I was a woman, which sounds ironic, and I've definitely felt that since I've been in financial services. But what I felt, it was almost like an accepted inequality. And what I mean by that is that we knew that certain roles weren't, whether you can argue whether they're suitable or not, but, you know, women were not allowed to carry out their role, those particular roles. And obviously on joining, you know that, you make those decisions, you're open to that. But actually, if you take Sandhurst as a really good example, each intake has, I'm not sure if it's the same, but I'm pretty sure it is, a whole company, which are 3 different platoons of about 30. And it used to be that you would have 3 platoons, one of which would be a female platoon. So a third of those joining would be female, and they would be in their own platoon. I think, and don't quote me because I may be wrong, but from my understanding, that they now have a mixed platoon, or they have mixed platoons. So I think it's moving in a different direction, because women now, all roles are open to women in the military. But I definitely never felt like, other than physically, it felt like you had more to prove. You know, physical fitness is a real currency in the army. Thankfully, I was on the sort of fitter end of the scale. So it's almost like, if you get over that hurdle, you get a lot of respect from the guys, because they say, wow, she can carry what we can carry, she can do what we can do. So actually, that's like the big hurdle to get over.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think, and again, don't quote me on this, but I think that back then, and maybe even to some extent now, it's unwritten, but women couldn't put themselves forward for roles in the special forces and certain forward reconnaissance type position.
You can now.
Units. You can now, I'm sure. Yeah. So just, you did mention actually in the middle there that you didn't feel like this was the case in financial services necessarily, which obviously brings us on quite nicely to really the crux of all of this stuff. So we put in the notes about the place of women in financial service. I know it's such a broad topic, but you know, my mother worked in financial services for 35-40 years before retiring, and followed a very kind of typical, you know, start as a receptionist all the way up to a head of department kind of role. Things are obviously way different now, but when someone like yourself who's actually kind of in the middle as a wealth advisor, you're kind of seeing all these different aspects of the broad industry. How do you see female roles now? Do you still feel that there's this sort of element that women are not perceived in the same way as men in financial services in general, and there's still a bit of an uphill struggle?
Unfortunately, I would say 100%. I think I felt it more when I was in a corporate environment. So for most of my career in financial services, I was working for a large corporate, initially as an investment manager, and then the last few years were actually as a senior leader in a FTSE 100 company. And it's definitely there in terms of in those leadership spaces, in those rooms where decisions are being made, where it felt like as a woman, you have less of a voice. As a woman, you have less role models around you. You have less women to look to that are in those senior positions within the industry. And we know this is not just financial services. We know that it's that sort of, if you think of the pyramid effect. I remember when I worked for a firm, the first firm I worked for, I won't name them, but they were FTSE 250. And we used to say in our report and accounts, or they used to say, you know, got over half of our firm are women. What they didn't say is only about 10% of those women were what I would call frontline. So investment managers like myself, and actually those sort of not in those support roles. So I think that we need more role models across the industry, because what happens with role modeling is that hopefully you will then mentor, you will support others, you give people something to look to, and actually you have more of a voice around the table. And just to quote the 30% Club, which is, I was a mentee on the 30% Club. It was something I was supported with, part of a sort of ambition to move to a board director. You need 30% of whatever demographic you're looking at to have a voice. I mean, it's great to see that, you know, times are changing, but I would say you're still in the minority. I expect when I walk into a room of any type of meeting in financial services, 9 times out of 10, I'm one of few women in that room.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is a lived experience. Most of us, if we actually start to think about it, have had that experience too. Did you find that during your time with let's just call them bigger firms, as it were, that having children or the ambition to have children, any of that stuff was something that either held you back or was perceived to hold you back? Because I think that the world's not changed for the better or for the worse, but since COVID and people working at home, it's a whole different ball game to how things were 10 years ago, and working from home and juggling things, right?
Yeah, and my experience certainly reflects that. I know other people's experience might be different, but as an example, when I first went back to work full time, I had a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I was commuting to London. This was for an investment firm. And I was getting a 6:30 train and home at, 8 o'clock at night. My childcare was costing about as much as I was bringing home net a month, once you also then added in my train fare. And I asked to work from home 1 day a week just to ease but my children were still going to be in childcare, but it's to ease the burden of that long commute, to be around more, to be able to go collect them from nursery, for them to not have such an early start. And I wasn't able to do it. It took me about 2 years to the point where I was then able to get a fob, and I was allowed to regularly work from home on a Friday. And that, it was never in my whole time in that firm, actually, it was never really the done thing to work at home. Whereas now, obviously, I think it's a different space for lots of different reasons. And I do think for women, it is fact that we are the ones that physically go through childbirth, and we are the ones that, even if we want to come back to work, maybe we're breastfeeding, maybe we've got, I know I can speak from experience. I had really low self-esteem and self-confidence when I came back, and I was having panic attacks even getting on a tube, because I was not used to being in crowds, and I worried, what if something happened to me and I didn't make it home to my baby? It was all these things that you can't imagine that women then have to go through. So yeah, I think there is more that can be done to support women. And it definitely does impact, not saying it doesn't impact men, by the way, because we know it does. And actually, I'm a big believer that, men and women as parents, we have an equally important role in the lives of our children. But I do think we need to recognise that those roles look and feel different. And the impact on our careers looks and feels different. And actually a stat from the finance side, which sort of really indicates that, By the time we get to 60, and this is on average, by the way, I've seen definitely worse, and I've seen better actually, but what women's pensions pots tend to be 1/3 of that of men's by the time they reach 60. So that is a financial indicator of what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's quite a damning stat, actually, isn't it? And yeah, it's tricky, and I think that the support that's in place now from firms, especially since COVID, is markedly different to how it was. And I've also got some first-hand experience of that. But I do think it's tougher, and there's not a real solution to this, by the way, but it's tougher on smaller companies who don't have the resources that big firms or big corporates do when it comes to supporting their staff, and especially outside of the Southeast. And we'll probably touch on geography a bit later, but outside of the Southeast, where firms have offices that are important places to be and regional hubs and all of that, it can be difficult to let people work at home, especially if the infrastructure is not there. But I feel like things have moved on a lot. Now, actually talking of the child thing, when we were at that Inclusive Angels event, not last week, but the week before, there was a very impressive founder on one of the other panels who had founded her business just after having her baby. I think she was one of those sort of extraordinary people that can manage to do a million things at once. But that brings us sort of onto angel investing, and something that you said that really stayed with me on that night. And that was that, I think the panel sort of asked you broadly, how can we get into this? And I think you basically said, well, it's not all about just being able to invest or to found, but there are numerous ways of playing a role in this. And I just wanted to expand on that, because it's something that I think a lot of people in the audience suddenly started nodding their heads and, giving it, oh, actually, that's true. Like maybe you have a skill in an area that can be good as a consultant, and maybe you can get some equity for your consultation skills or whatever. Do you want to just expand on what you meant when you sort of said that? You don't have to necessarily be an investor to get involved in this stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the things I remember saying was about being in the room. I think it's really important for more women to be in the room. I'm a member of a couple of angel investor networks, and I am normally in the minority when I'm in the room. There's normally 2 or 3 women, about 10% of the room, there in an angel investor capacity. And clearly, we don't, as does anybody in the room, walk out of every sort of pitch event, if you like, investing necessarily in those companies. Thankfully, we tend to have a really good mix of female founded and male founded companies in the room, which is brilliant. But my point being that sometimes if you're a female founder and you're coming into a room and you're very much used to going up against, I mean, let's again put this into some statistics to create context. 1% of UK funding went into female funding companies. 1%. It's just astounding when we think about equality that that's the space. And there's lots of reasons behind that, we know. But being in the room, being that helpful person, you just walk in there, actually, this room feels a bit more friendly. There's somebody there that I can relate to and empathize to. You've probably spoken to them before or after the event. There's normally a bit of networking. And also, by being in the room, you start to learn. You start to learn about what sort of companies are looking for investment, which helps keep on a real sort of forward-looking view from lots of different perspectives: economic, your own interest, investment perspectives. And then also, once you start doing that, you start to gain the confidence of, actually, I could add some value if I'm going to be on that cap table. I can add some value, not from just an investment perspective, but also maybe with some of my experience, or just some of my experience. So I've had a couple of examples where either I've not been in a position to invest in terms of what they're looking for, or financially, that is, or that it's not something that I want to invest in, but that I can see that there could be something in there. So maybe we could start our relationship by me being an informal advisor, maybe coaching with with one of the founders or the senior directors, you know, and I think those become really invaluable. And you can really build those relationships, and you can start small with angel investing. You can start small by being in the room, offering your services where they're valuable, and then maybe start small investing. And actually, that's where the ball starts rolling. And I think you can build confidence, knowledge, contacts, and yeah, I think it becomes really mutually beneficial on both sides.
Yeah, I think the network side of it's crucial as well, right? Like, you've just got to meet as many people as you can. I mean, that's not just for in the angel investing world, by the way. That's just kind of a life lesson, I guess.
Generally,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's really, I think actually, you know, it's great advice for certainly any women listening that want to get into this sector, but in fact anyone listening that wants to get into this sector. I think, you know, be in the room, go to these events, like those events. I mean, who knows, right? You never know. You can't go to everything, but, you know, pick and choose and put your face in the room and try and do the difficult thing of going to interrupt people having conversations and say, hi, I'm Oli. How's it going? Like, I've done enough of it.
Will you come on my podcast?
Yeah, well, exactly. That's what I did to you. I think I sort of, you know, cornered you just to say, you know, I really enjoyed what you had to say. But then I think that's how things genuinely move. And, you know, one day you'll shake hands with someone who, you know, says, oh, wow, I didn't realize there was this thing that you could help me with. And that's how things move on. I found actually pretty much all of the speakers on the panel that night had something I could take away. And one thing that I was really quite pleased about, there was one lady there who was quite formidable. I won't name her, but I was going to run this by you because it's something that I sort of feel like it's a bit of a stereotype that slightly holds women back in this sector, is that there's this sort of thing about formidable entrepreneurs like Deborah Meaden and Karen Brady, and, you know, people that are just this sort of very strong, but, you know, shoulder pads and all that stuff. Like, maybe I'm generalizing a bit there. Do you think that in 2023 there's still this kind of, not need, but this sort of thing that women have to be formidable in business in order to get along, and that you have to sort of present quite this sort of powerful front? Do you think that it's still, that it's there, that happens for a reason, or do you think it's, you know, part of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I think in answer to one part of the question around, you know, does it happen for a reason in terms of women, you know, whether it's wearing that persona or that's how they are or that's how they feel they need to be. And let's face, for some people that is their authentic self. So it is, but for some people that is that persona that they feel they need to wear to be successful. And I think it comes back to the point we've made around being the minority in a room. And what tends to happen is that you start to compensate by developing more masculine traits, being more masculine. You know, I have no doubt that I was more masculine when I was in the military, even though I had a pink room and everyone used to take the mick out of me. And then when I was on leave, I got my nails done. I had to take them back off when I went back. But, you know, you had to be a certain way as part of that tribe, if you like. And I think that's part of why women in male-dominated environments can become more masculine, some of it conscious, maybe some of it less conscious. I do think, and again, this is my personal view, so it may not be everybody's view, I'm sure it isn't, but I do think it's changing. I think there's a lot more acceptance, particularly post-COVID, but also just with the changing of the generations and where we look at authenticity, vulnerability-based trust. You know, we talk a lot about authentic leadership. And I definitely adapted my approach. I was still in a leadership role through COVID. In fact, I led the response for our business unit in that space. I had quite a big team. They were disparate around the country. A lot of women were in that team. And I was at my most vulnerable in that point as a single mum, working from home 16 hours a day, trying to, well, I didn't manage homeschooling. I just couldn't do it. But, you know, you're at home with your children on your own. And I think going through those experiences, and each of our experience would have been different in COVID, and we've come out in a different space, is that I think we almost know when somebody's putting on a front. I think there's this element of, do we really need to be like that? And I don't think we do. I think if that's you and that's how you are, who are we to judge? You know, some women will, that is their personality. I think what I found really nice is that I can be myself more, particularly since you leaving the corporate environment. I actually remember speaking to people that I used to work with, and they're like, you're just beaming. You're just, and a big element of that is that I'm relaxed. I'm not carrying this burden of needing to be a certain way, of needing to walk in a room and be, right, I've got to get my power suit on and my, you know, and you do feel a bit like that because you feel like I've got to come in and I've got to, you know, really hold the room because I'm already sort of at a disadvantage because I'm the only female in the room. So how, you know, how do I dress? Oh my goodness, like, am I too dressed up? I don't know if you saw recently the very sad story around, obviously, the lady that went missing, Nicola Bulley, in the north. And then I saw a really distressing post on LinkedIn, which basically was all about the police detective wearing a sleeveless dress. I mean, WTF, sorry, but I mean, it makes me feel sick just thinking about it. Why can't she wear a sleeveless dress? Why? Do we comment on the way the men are dressed? And it just, I think, you know, if you bring that back into financial services as well, you do definitely see and for that. And just going back to your formidable piece, I think that you can be outwardly formidable, but you can equally be inwardly formidable. So, you know, you can have this, I believe, if you're going to be successful, you need to be passionate, you need to be determined, you need to be driven, you need to be all those things. That doesn't necessarily mean that you need to show that to the world all of the time. You know, often we only see the tip of an iceberg with somebody and we don't see the stresses, the challenges, you know, all of those difficult elements. I always think of like that, you know, person pedaling below water and you just see that actually beneath they're going crazy. That's what most of us are like. You know, we're all doing that underneath. So yeah, I think it's changing. I hope it's changing. And I'm definitely trying to change that persona of being more warm, more approachable, authentic. And you know what? That won't be for everybody, but you can't like everybody. Not everyone will like me and what I say and vice versa. So I just think be yourself.
That's a really refreshing viewpoint on it. I think the only reason I sort of ask about it is that if you just don't want that to be the only role model, especially in mass media, when the only kind of female entrepreneurial role models are either the formidable type or maybe in some circumstances in the news recently, those that one shouldn't be looking up to for fairly questionable practices and things. You kind of want, I suppose it's the same with all entrepreneurs that are in the spotlight. There's something that makes them newsworthy or media worthy. And, you know, for some it's, you know, the boring day-to-day Elon Musk stuff, but the guy does just so many crazy things that you can't help but read about it. But it would be really nice to see some female role models in business that just are themselves, I guess, and then find out what it is about them that's made them successful, rather than having to stand there and say, I am this, I am that. You know what I mean? It's just that kind of that thing. We've got a little bit of time left. I just wanted to, you seem like a very down-to-earth person, I'll say that just before I kind of ask you a question that might make it or not, but are there, and you've definitely seen all different sides of not only this industry, if you like, as in early stage companies and angel investing and then bigger corporates and of course time in the forces, but what are the biggest obstacles on a daily basis or challenges for women in terms of professional advancement or gatekeeping or things like that that really bug you? Because I mean, not your persona is very laid back, but I'm sure there's stuff that annoys you day to day that you don't tend to.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I'm going to get you started just because we're going to come on to some advice for young entrepreneurs in a minute. But what let's get you started. What is it? What things in your eyes need to change or should change sooner rather than later?
Okay, so might be a slightly controversial point, but I think we should always start with ourselves. And I think that's a coach in me, but also the parent in me and just who I am, where the first thing, hold up the mirror And I think we can be our own worst enemies as women. Too many women don't back themselves, I believe. I think there are too many women that don't have the confidence and self-esteem. And don't get me wrong, the lack of self-confidence and self-esteem is likely to be because of some of the behaviours that they experience as women. We get that. But equally, I think sometimes it's about, how do I need to respond? Like, do I need to take all of this personally? Do I need to sort of cut through the noise and really be clear on my purpose, who I am, what I believe I can add value to in this world, and what I can achieve? And so I think the first thing is back yourself. Do everything you can for you around your own well-being. I speak a lot. I'm actually speaking at an event next week around financial well-being, and actually one tomorrow as well with a business and their employees. And I always bring in the 3 pillars, which are financial well-being, clearly, but physical and mental well-being. And without those 2, physical and mental well-being, I don't believe you could be as financially secure and well as you can be. I don't believe you can make the best financial decisions, for example, if you're not physically well or you're not mentally well. I think they all go together. So I think, women, help yourselves, help each other, do what you need to do to feel confident. It doesn't help. I'm sorry to come back to that point about what you wear, but a lot of how we feel about ourselves comes to how we present ourselves to the world, what we wear, how we dress. And if so often what you wear and you think, oh, you go out and you look, you're like, oh, I'm going to wear this bright flowery shirt as I am today, and I've got my pink nails on. Yeah, that's me. That's what I like to do. But someone that says, oh, is that really appropriate? How does that then affect your self-confidence and your self-esteem? Do we say that to guys? Yeah, we probably still do, actually. I'm sure that there have been men that have been in that space. But too often it's women, and it's the thing that women are pulled out for. It's the thing rather than the professional element. And that, going back to the point about what really annoys me, it's when people focus on a woman and what she's wearing rather than, or what she looks like, rather than what she's delivering or not delivering. You feel free to have your opinion around that person's professionalism or their ability to do, we're all allowed our own opinions. Doesn't necessarily mean we need to voice them, by the way. So that's another thing. I think sometimes you just need to scroll on by. I mean, how many times do you see something, think, no, that's not for me to engage, because why would we? So yeah, I think it's that. I think we need to help ourselves, help each other, but also ask that women do something where, I always think of the ladder, like holding the ladder up for each other. I have so many female friends, some that are in exactly the same space as me, but we don't see each other as competitors. We support each other. And I think it's really sad when you come across a formidable woman who it feels like has become that way and formidable by sort of pushing every other woman to the side and wanted to be the strongest women in the room. Only once have I had a female boss like that, and I told her exactly how I felt about that and promptly left. Because one thing is for sure, these people never change, or rarely change, and therefore it's up to you. Do you put up with that sort of behaviour, or do you remove that from your life? And I chose to do the latter.
Well, we could probably get you started a bit more, because
there's a lot in there.
There's a bit in there, isn't there? But that's really nice to hear. So actually that brings us on to the last thing that I guess we were going to cover, which was just we saw at the event we were at some fairly young entrepreneurs and some entrepreneurs, both on the founding side and sort of entrepreneurial investor types, who of differing ages, and everyone has different life experiences. But what I would say, since I've been working in venture in general, is that there's way more ambition in this sector than there is in many others. Now, that's not to say that people that work in investment banking don't have the same level of ambition, but the type of ambition you're showing as a founder, takes into account risk and all sorts of other things. And your short-term ambition may be to look to business, but the long-term ambition is to do something else with that. What just from your professional point of view, but also what you've seen and observed, what sort of keywords and advice have you got for younger female entrepreneurs at the moment, maybe those that haven't quite had the same lived experiences as you to this point?
God, that's a good question. I think they cross over with lots of elements of life, actually. And the first one would be going back to my point earlier, which is back yourself. You know, if you're really sure, firstly, be confident in yourself, whether that's walking that room or putting that pen to, you know, believe in yourself. Because if you don't believe in yourself, how can you expect others to then have that belief? So I think start with the self-belief. I think also build your support network. So that support network, again, doesn't have to be female. In fact, I'd advocate that it's not just female, that actually you build a support network. Hopefully there will be a woman, some women in that support network, whether it's just family support, friendship support, professional support and advice. Find someone that you can speak to that has maybe faced some of the challenges that you can foresee, or the challenges that you're facing now. There's a great story I read on LinkedIn yesterday very quickly about a soldier that fell into a hole and kept screaming for help to get out, and lots of people were offering them help, but he couldn't get out until another soldier jumped in the hole and sat with him and said, I've been in this hole many times and I know how to get out, and let's get out together. And I think the point is there, if you can create empathy in the people around you who have been there, you can benefit from their experience. So build that support network. I also think be really quite focused about, if you're looking to build your business, you're looking to raise investment, really be focused about how you're going to do that, and go in there with the belief that you are there alongside, rather than think this is a male female thing, this is a gender thing. This isn't. This is just you and potential investors. And I think sometimes, I know it's easier said than done, but remove the gender, just be you. And if you see it as an issue, personally, I think it can become an issue. So we know there's a lack of female founders and investment in female founders, you know, all of those things, but don't make that the issue and the reason why you don't go forward, because that's why then we're in this vicious circle. So, you know, I think go for it is what I would say. Build that network, have your self-belief, and be really focused on what you're doing and how you're going to raise that investment and support.
Words to live by, and strong words of encouragement as well. I think that's the other thing is, you know, it's just encouragement, isn't it? Right? You know, to encourage yourself and others that things can be done. I think when a lot of us are younger, these invisible barriers are put in front of us by older generations, and it's difficult, you can't do it, or oh, that sounds difficult. But actually, you know, that adage that you can do whatever you want if you try is, you know, there's merit to it for sure. And look, I think that's really nice, a way to finish off. So let's just recap. So if anyone wants to get in touch and talk to you, where can they find you?
Well, the best place probably go to my website, which is woodmitchellfp.co.uk. I'm sure we'll include some details of contact as well on the blurb after this. But yeah, all of my details are on the website. I am at the Southwest Business Expo in a couple of weeks. I am based across London and the Southwest. So in fact, I'm in Bristol tomorrow, London next week. So yeah, I'm sort of out and about, which is great. But I've really enjoyed speaking on this podcast. Thanks, Oli. And I genuinely do have this at the heart of what I do. As I say, you know, financial education, I think, is key. And one of the notes I would like to end on, actually, I think we discussed it at the panel as well, is that if we can do anything, it is supporting our young people in learning good financial behaviours and habits, because they are our future. They are our future entrepreneurs. They are our future business leaders and investors. And our habits as people around money tend to be formed at a young age. They say around the age of 7. That, of course, doesn't mean your money habits can't be changed, because they absolutely can. But help our young people, and then also go out and educate yourself, learn. take responsibility for your own financial security. And actually, you'll find that money, finance is not as dry as you think. And, going back to the 3 pillars, whether we like money or don't like money, or, the reality is we all need money to be able to live and survive. So, financial well-being, your physical and your mental well-being, they're all important.
Yeah. Solid way to finish up. And I guess people can find you on LinkedIn as well, Samantha.
Oh yeah,
Wood.
Always on LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, it's the new place to be. All right, look, that's been fantastic, Sam. Thanks so much. Maybe I'll see you at the Southwest one or another time. But for now, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.